welcome to the Dashboard Effect podcast. I'm Rick Thompson, and I'm back with Landon Oaks, who is the Director of Solutions for Blue Margin. And for this episode, I wanted to talk about a question we got from one of our viewers/listeners who wanted to know the difference between a semantic data set or semantic model and what is sometimes referred to as a gold lakehouse or a silver lakehouse or a bronze lakehouse. They have different purposes and different architectures and so on. So I thought we'd just spend a few minutes talking about that. You're the expert at this stuff. You run a group of really smart guys that designs and builds these things. So maybe you could start us off by just describing what those terms gold lakehouse, bronze lakehouse, silver lakehouse, gold lakehouse refer to, and then how you think about them in your group and sort of what architecture do we generally follow there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so in terms of the lakehouse, there's a bunch of different ways that people can design these things. So you'll see variations all over the place. But the kind of leading idea is that you'd have a single lakehouse and you have layers within that lakehouse.
Okay.
So you'd start off with your bronze layer, which typically would be just your raw data as is from the source.
So you're just pulling everything in, dumping it into the lakehouse, not doing transforms, not necessarily even cleaning it at all.
Yeah.
And that's your bronze lakehouse.
Yeah, getting the data from point A to point B. And there is, with how we typically do this, we will do a little bit where in terms of if we're getting JSON back, we're going to transform that into a tabular format.
Okay.
We're not just going to throw the JSON into the gold
make
layer.
future users have to deal with that. Okay.
Exactly. Yep. So, but we weren't touching the actual data itself, just the format the data's in.
Yeah.
So from there, you then can have a silver layer. So the silver layer would typically be things like pre-joins, light transformations.
What's a pre-join versus a join?
Yeah. So it's kind of a nuanced idea. So really the main time you would want to use that is if you have a ton of data and there's a small little join that you want to combine two tables to get you kind of everything in one spot.
Gotcha.
For your heavy kind of transformations later.
Sort of denormalize a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
And you typically don't need to do that, but there are cases where you will.
Okay. All right. Great. So so that's silver. We don't always use that, right?
No.
Sometimes we just don't need it.
Usually not.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't found too much of a use case for that.
Okay. So then going to gold, what is that?
Yeah. So gold is essentially where your transformed, your ready to report on data lives.
Okay.
So from bronze or silver, you're going to pull it from those two layers, do the majority of your transformations. That's when you really start to think about, I'm going to create the groundwork for my fact tables, my dimension tables, those pieces, and then I save them in the gold layer.
Okay. Most report writers, let's say a Power BI authors, are not going to use that gold layer directly though, right? And that's where the semantic data set comes in. Am I right about that?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. So that whole lakehouse in the gold layer, that's really how you're storing your data. That's how you're getting it ready for reporting. When you go to create a report, you're almost always going to have some sort of semantic model backing your report. Now that semantic model gets data from the gold layer.
Sure, right. Sort of passes. It's like a view almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It grabs the data out of the gold layer. In that semantic model, that's when you really define my relationships.
Yeah.
So how does my transaction table relate to my customer table?
And get to a star schema that's not super technical people can understand and not have to write SQL and can start using it.
Yep. It's more of like a click and drag exercise or very UI friendly. And then that's where you also put your business logic. Right?
Yeah,
what's my definition of total revenue?
Right. I always use that example. You'd think that would be an easy one. And
it's really
you can get three definitions from the same business on that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Before we go to that, because I want to talk to you a little bit how we build that, I skipped over a point I wanted to talk about, which was, do you actually write a full copy of the data in the silver, bronze, silver, and gold layers of the lakehouse? Mm-hmm. Or are you using, I know in Microsoft Fabric, you can use pointers or shortcuts back to data, and the advantage is you're not having to have double the data.
Yeah. So it kind of depends. So I will say for 95% of what we see, probably more than that, probably more like 99%, honestly, of what we see, we don't need to save copies of the data.
Okay.
There will be those use cases where you have maybe tons and tons of sources, tons and tons of data,
Yeah.
whatever it might be, where it's just too much processing power to
Too slow going through the shortcuts.
Exactly.
You actually need a set of
yeah.
written data.
You need something to go every night to prep the data, get it in there.
Yeah.
That way, it's much quicker to get
Yeah.
to.
Okay.
So yeah, it kind of depends on the use case, but in
Case
general, we try not to duplicate that data. And it gives us two big advantages. One is obviously cost. More data.
Not
you're
paying for
storing.
the storage.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, plus the compute, dealing with all that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So big cost savings, and then also you're more agile. People want to ask you for new columns, new tables. It's all right there for you. You don't have to go add it to some complex process.
Yeah.
Wait for that to finish. It's at your fingertips.
Oh, yeah. That's great. Okay. That's all clear to me. Good. The semantic model, you were talking about the business logic, and actually the viewer that wrote in the question for us said, how do you involve or do you involve the business in defining that semantic model? And, we were talking about this just before we started recording. The answer is, yeah, you have to, because as the engineer, you don't know how they're defining revenue. You don't know how they're defining lots of stuff that support their processes, but if you don't work in the business, you don't know how that goes. So you have to involve the business a lot to figure out sort of what, I'll call them views, but serverless SQL views or whatever you're using, PySpark, whatever. Figure out what the right configuration is so that the report writers will get the right answers.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so there's a bunch of discovery that goes on with the client, right?
Yeah, lots of discovery. And there's kind of two different facets to that too. So like there's part of the semantic model you don't need business users for. And that's more so, how does my data relate? Most of the time business users don't know that there's a customer GUID or a customer key that you can relate to your transaction data, your purchase order data, or whatever.
Yeah.
So that piece, you don't necessarily need them. But yeah, once you get into the more detailed fact around, how many orders did I have last month, you absolutely have to have business users. And there's one thing that we've learned here consulting is, even if the answer seems obvious, ask.
Right.
Because,
revenue seems obvious, right?
yeah, exactly.
But maybe they include other income in their revenue, or maybe they don't, or how do they deal with returns?
Exactly.
That type of thing.
And there's even things where like something as simple as like maybe EBITDA is defined differently between different businesses.
Yeah.
And you'd think it's a standard definition, but it's just not, and that's just so it's good to ask. Even if you feel you're not going to look great asking. Do it.
So there's that discovery, then you build what you think is the right semantic model, and then there's validation.
Yeah,
So, all right,
exactly.
we're going to give you some numbers, we're going to look at them together. We know the formulas or the measures are working right, but is the data what you expected?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be interesting. Like a lot of times it isn't, and so you find out the definition you got wasn't actually how they expect it to come out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Other times you'll find that they've been using a spreadsheet solution forever, and when you match it up to that, the spreadsheet's been wrong for the last decade.
Yeah, those are the worst.
So there's a lot to navigate there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there'll be times even where they can't think of what exactly all the nuances are for coming up with this metric. Right. Once you get numbers in front of them, then they're like, oh yeah, like I completely forgot about this. Piece of data that comes in that we need to filter out.
Okay.
So when you ask them on the spot, they're just doing it off of memory. When you get numbers in front of them and examples, the light bulbs go off.
Yeah, that's interesting. That happens so much in BI. You put a report in front of someone that they've designed perfectly, you've designed with them, and they see it and they're like, oh, now that I see this, I know what I actually need.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess the answer to the question is, the business is heavily involved.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we couldn't do it without them, that semantic layer. And there's a lot of back and forth. Like you get an initial, you build that semantic model, and then you're still doing some correcting until you get it just right.
Yeah. It's a ongoing thing. Hopefully we get a solid definition before too long, but there's even times where we'll have a solid definition for a couple months and something will change.
Yeah,
you got to go back and tweak it.
Well, and the business changes.
Yeah,
like their process might change. They got a new CFO and He's looking at it differently. They got bought by a PE firm, and they want to see it a certain way. As you said with EBITDA, there's some things that a PE firm might put below the line or as an add back, and how are they handling that? And it may not be obvious. You need them to guide you on that.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
All right. Good discussion. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. No problem.
All right. Talk to you soon.